Yeah, I almost
Okay.
took my top down on the 370Z, but then I figured I'd have to put it up on Monday or Tuesday, so I didn't take it down.
Yeah, I've got the top down the D. In fact, I went for a ride today. Took it out for a run, and it sure is fun to drive, I'll tell you.
Yeah.
Okay, well, it is 7:30. We are going to begin. I welcome all of you to this special bonus session of the Around the Rabbi's Tish, when we'll be talking about Pesach. But let us dedicate this hour, and I will dedicate this in keeping with Jewish tradition. I dedicate this period of Jewish study in anticipation of the holidays, the many holidays that will be coming. But of course, Shabbat coming tomorrow, and a refuah shlema for those who are not well, and also that our hostages need to be returned and peace must reign in the Middle East once again. Who would like to add to the dedication? Please go ahead and wave, and I will call on you. Ray.
In memory of Senator Joe Lieberman, who passed away 2 weeks ago.
Yes, thank you. Other dedications?
Well, yeah, I'll just honor my father's yard site, which was yesterday.
Thank you. Other dedications, please wave. Stan.
Well, I'll dedicate to Jeremy and the community that we enjoy and learn from. A blessing for all of us.
Very nice. Thank you, Stan. Other dedications? Let's say the bracha together. The last words are La'asok b'divrei Torah. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. So we're going to get right into it. Actually, what I'd like to do, just to start things off and to give us a little bit of a chuckle, we're going to actually begin with a brief video. It's The Lion King Passover, a video by David Kabinski, and I think that you're going to enjoy this, and it will set the mood for our evening. Let me share this with you and hope that you'll all be able to see it and hear it okay.
Nothing's happening.
Let's try this again. Here we are. Okay.
To be free. We're eating the matzah for 8 nights and days. We're eating the matzah, so put that bread away. We had to hurry from the land we were slaves, so we're Hametz free, culinarily. I'm eating a matzah. And who doesn't love some good matzah? What's a matzah? What's a matzah with you? We had to hurry from the land we were slaves. Yeah, so we're Hametz free, culinarily. We're eating the matzah.
Great. And that literally sets the table, the Shulchan Aruch for us. And we're going to, and by the way, this is the group 613. And what's wonderful about these groups, the Maccabees, for example, is that it sounds like there's a full orchestra behind them, but it's all a cappella. All of the sound that you hear are just human voices. There's no snare drum, no percussion. It's all singing. So we're going to begin looking at the Torah selection that will explain to us what the very first Seder must have been like. This is the first Seder as described in the Torah. And as we go, if you have any questions, don't hesitate to ask. And we begin here with the 12th chapter of Exodus. Tell the whole community of Israel that on the 10th day of this month, each man is to take a lamb for his family, one for each household. Now, why is this important? The plagues have happened. We're coming to the last of the plagues, and it tells us that on the 10th of the Hebrew month, which means that these slaves who have been having their lives determined by slave masters and therefore had no sense of time or calendar, they are now being told by God, there is now, from now on in your life, a calendar. You will be able to control time that you have never been able to control in your entire lives. And this is the very remarkable moment in the Israelite community to realize that time is now going to be something that they will be able to master themselves. Take care of them. So they're going to gather together and they're going to take a lamb. Take care of them until the 14th day of the month, when all the community, the people of the community of Israel, must slaughter them at twilight. So they're going to have these lambs for 4 days. They're supposed to get it on the 10th of the month and then wait 4 days until they're actually going to slaughter it. Then they are to take some of the blood and put it on the sides and tops of the door frames of the houses where they eat the lambs. They shall eat the flesh that same night. They shall eat it roasted over the fire with unleavened bread and bitter herbs, with matza and mirorim, bitter herbs. So you can already see the shape of that first Seder and what we continue to do more than 3,000 years later in commemoration of that. This is how you are to eat it. With your cloak tucked into your belt, your sandals on your feet, and your staff in your hand. I don't know why more of us, when we have our Seder, don't try to duplicate even the garb of that moment as they tucked their cloak in and they wore sandals on their feet. We should be wearing our track shoes and our athletic shoes at the Seder in order to show that we are going to be ready to leave at a moment's notice. Eat it in haste, bechipazon, in haste. It is the Lord's Passover. On that same night I will pass through Egypt and strike down every firstborn, both men and animals, and I will bring judgment on all the gods of Egypt. Now, there's a big question as to what this means, the firstborn of each family. Who is included? I've been reading a very rabbinic discussion that has been going on during this day and trying to figure out, was it a multi-generational killing of the firstborn, or was it just one family whose firstborn died? And the consensus of the rabbinic community seems to be it was multi-generational. So an adult grandparent died, a parent died, a child died, if they were all the firstborn, the men, not the women. And the shock of this must have been sigignificant and profound. And it's interesting that it includes the animals and let me mute. Okay. The question seems to be, well, why weren't they warned? Well, of course, they had 9 plagues to warn them. This 10th plague, which was going to take its terrible, terrible toll, was going to include innocence. And why the animals? I had an insight into this as this last month I've been reading the biography of Harry S. Truman, who was faced with the question as to when the decision was going to be made about dropping the atomic bomb on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. His advisors, including Oppenheimer, have been discussing, should we not tell the Japanese we're going to do this? And shouldn't we drop the bomb where maybe there aren't a whole lot of people so that it'll just shake them up and say, you better start to make peace with us because it's going to just get worse. And the decision was made that the way that Americans' lives were going to be saved was only by inflicting the greatest shock value possible upon the Japanese. And that was only going to happen if you dropped the atomic bomb on major centers of population. And that seems to be what was going to ultimately motivate Pharaoh, that the bomb, in this particular case, the slaying of the firstborn, was going to be what was necessary in order to shock all of Egypt, in order for Pharaoh finally to say, all right, leave. So we continue to read. Any comments before we come back to our text? Gladys. Don't forget to unmute, Gladys.
I read a midrash once that when they woke up the next day, the firstborn were not dead. Although the threat came through, the firstborn were not dead. And so the Pharaoh said, okay, that plague didn't come through, chase them, go get them. It obviously didn't happen.
Interesting. Thank you, Gladys.
Midrash.
Yeah. Thank you. Other questions or thoughts so far? Okay, let's return to our text. I will bring judgment on all the gods of Egypt. I am the Lord. The blood will be a sign for you on the houses where you are. And when I see the blood, I will pass over you so that no plague will destroy you when I strike the land of Egypt. And there would be those that would say that's where we get the name of the holiday, Passover. And yet, as some of you have heard me say before, actually, this is a bad translation of the word Pesach. It says a little bit later on, but also in the book of Exodus, and God will pasach el et hadelet. God will, and I won't translate the word Pesach yet, will pasach the door. Below yavo et hamashchit, will not allow the destroyer, the mashchit, to enter. And the question is, if you want to stop the destroyer from entering the house, your passing over the house is not going to allow you, God or your angel, to protect the home. You're already disappearing off into the flyover. The only way that you're going to be able to stop the destroyer from entering the home and killing the firstborn Jews is to be at the front of the door. The Hebrew word Pesach, elsewhere in the Bible, is not translated as Passover. It's translated as protect. And that's why there are those that say this really should be translated as God saying, and I will protect the home and not allow the destroyer to enter. And it really should not be called the holiday of Passover. It should be called the holiday of divine protection. But what is interesting that I've always wondered is, were there Jews who died in the killing of the firstborn? And I think that there were. And the reason is because they didn't put the blood on the doorpost. Now, the blood on the doorpost, the rabbis say, was not there in order to tell God where the Jews lived. And we know this because the ninth plague, which was darkness, it says very clearly that the darkness knew where the Jews lived, and the Jews had, the Israelites had light in their habitations, and the Egyptians were the ones who were affected. If the darkness knew where the Jews lived, then certainly the angel of death would know where, or the mashchit, the destroyer, would know where the Jews live. That's not what the blood on the doorpost demonstrated. In fact, the rabbis say this whole idea of bringing the lamb and sacrificing the lamb becomes crucial here. That the Israelites were told to take a lamb, right, parade it through the streets of Cairo before they sacrifice it, which meant that the Egyptians were going to see the Israelites dragging this lamb. What is important about the lamb for the Egyptians? The lamb was one of their gods. And so very much like a cow in India, you're not going to take a cow in India, parade it through the streets of Mumbai, and then slaughter it in front of the Hindus. You were not going to therefore do the same thing with a lamb, slaughter it in front of the Egyptians, or else they were going to tear you from limb to limb. But those Israelites who had faith that God would protect them were the ones who slaughtered the lamb, dipped the hyssop into the blood, and put it on the doorposts. So what did the blood on the doorpost show? Not where the Jews lived, but where the Jews who believed that God would protect them lived, who were worthy of redemption. Those Israelites, perhaps, this is my conjecture and others as well, maybe there were those Israelites who did not have that same faith in God, would not put the blood in the doorposts, and their firstborn died as well. So before we turn back, Stan.
Well, also look at it in the way that assimilation was the same then with Jews as it is now. Some people were more, part of the Jewish community. Other people were born that way, but weren't that part of the community, certainly not part of the believing community. So, that's another translation, another looking at the way that the doorpost and the blood was. The other question I had was, it's somewhat ironic in that we no longer in the Ashkenazi tradition can use roasted lamb for a Seder. We can use lamb chops, but not roasted lamb.
But the Sephardic as well. Nobody uses lamb for their Seder. And the reason is because there was a lamb sacrifice that was offered in the time of the Holy Temple. And the rabbis say, we are not able to offer any sacrifices anymore without the Holy Temple. We shouldn't even pretend to be offering a sacrifice. And that's why lamb is not going to be served in anybody's Seder. So it doesn't look like we're doing that. Following also what Stan had said before, let's remind ourselves that when the Israelites finally are able to leave, they are accompanied by a large contingent of Egyptians known as the Erev Rav in the Torah. These were those people who felt compassion for the Israelites, felt a part of the Israelite community, and escorted them out of Israel and into the wilderness. All right, let's continue with our look at the text itself. Now it goes on to say, this day shall be to you one of remembrance. You shall celebrate it as a festival to Hashem Adonai. Throughout the ages, you shall celebrate it as an institution for all time. So this is the statement that says this will be an annual holiday. And we've been doing this for the last 3,200 years. 7 days. So how does the Torah say we should observe it now after the first Seder? 7 days you shall eat unleavened bread. So we have to talk about what that is all about, unleavened bread. On the very first day you shall remove leaven from your houses, for whoever eats leavened bread from the first day to the seventh day, that person shall be cut off from Israel. So all of that is in Exodus 12. And obviously we see that it was a 7-day holiday, not an 8-day holiday. And in Israel, it is still a 7-day holiday. Then it goes on to say, a little bit later on, the Egyptians urged the people to hurry and leave the country, for otherwise, they said, we will all die. So the people took their dough before the yeast was added and carried it on their shoulders in kneading troughs wrapped in clothing. With the dough they had brought from Egypt, they baked cakes of unleavened bread. The dough was without yeast because they had been driven out of Egypt and did not have time to prepare for the food for themselves. So there we have the very famous statement as to why we have matzah. So now let's talk about a little bit about the themes of Pesach. What are the two major themes of Pesach? So obviously, it's going to be slavery and freedom. The Seder ritual is going to have a number of items that we're going to be doing, and we'll be looking at this in more detail next Thursday night. So what do we do during the course of the Seder to remind us of slavery? Obviously, we are going to have a bitter herb. We're going to have the charoset, which represents the mortar. We're going to, what other things do we have for slavery? Dip the parsley into the salt water to represent the tears. And I want to remind us then that there are two different kinds of slavery. There is the slavery that the Israelites experience where you're subjected to the whims of a master. And we have slavery today. So the idea of remembering slavery and eating our past, as the Seder represents, also is supposed to make us empathetic for people who are slaves today. If you experience slavery, the thinking is that will make you more compassionate for people who are experiencing slavery today. So we should take the opportunity to understand a little bit more about the people who are slaves today and see what can we do in order to try to help them. There are millions of slaves, and they're not just in places like Africa, but they are also in places like Beverly Hills, because we know that there are people who must work with, in some cases, no wages. You'll remember that the story it came out of Beverly Hills, which is why I mentioned it, of people who came who were illegal aliens, and they become nannies in homes, and they were told that, please come, you just give us your passport, we'll take care of it for you so that you don't lose it, and you'll look after our kid, and we'll give you some money, and you'll be able to send it back to your family in wherever. But what happens in some unsuspecting people's cases is that then these homeowners in Beverly Hills will say, you know, we're giving a room and board. We don't really feel comfortable giving you any money as well. And not only help with the kids, but make some meals and clean the windows. And when they say, well, we want to leave, will you give me our passport, give us our passports back? They say no. So we don't know how many people actually are going through this situation, but they are becoming slaves in America. People who work for terrible wages, people who are who are child workers, and so we have to be concerned about slaves everywhere in the world, including in our own country, and see if there's something that we can do to help them. So it would be helpful before Pesach to maybe Google slavery in America or slavery the world over and see what can we possibly do in order to make ourselves more aware of slavery, since this is our season of remembering when we were slaves. But the second thing is, let's not gloat that, but we're not slaves, so we don't have to worry about that because we are all slaves. We are slaves to anything that keeps us from doing what we feel is in our best interest. So, for example, if we have addictions, if we have temptations, if we have, if we are slaves to a bad temper, if we are slaves to liquor, to drugs, anything that is chaining us is something that we need to become more aware of in ourselves, and also take the holiday of Pesach to see if there's some way that we can free ourselves from that slavery. Any thoughts then about slavery and the fact that we experience slavery in some way, but also freedom. How do we experience freedom at our Seder? We recline on pillows. We have a wonderful meal. Is only free people can dine in the way in which we dine on Pesach. Any thoughts then before we continue on with the specifics of the holiday, like what is matzah and what is chametz? Any thoughts about slavery as the major theme of the holiday? You know, it's interesting when you take somebody who has been preparing for a month, as some people do, the day after Purim, they're already preparing for Passover. People who spend a lot of time preparing for the holiday, cleaning and preparing and baking and everything else, and you say, well, why are you doing all of this? What is the point of the holiday? They will say, stop bothering me. I'm too busy preparing for Passover. So that's why we needed to pause at least for a few minutes to remember the theme of slavery. And obviously the slaves that are in all of our minds are going to be the hostages in Gaza. And these people, God knows what situation they are living in and what they have to do as part of their being hostages. But they have become slaves, real life slaves, that we need to see if we can redeem them. Stan.
Well, we also have to remember our own history, that there was slaves, of course, in this country before it was a country and after, but also in the context of that was the way of the world. And we shouldn't look at the fact that there was slavery in the same way that we would say that these people are slaves today. So we have to be, look in both directions when we talk about what is a slave and who was a slave and why are they.
Which is an interesting conversation to have around the Seder table, to elevate that conversation. All right, so now the question is, what do Jews try not to eat and why? So we are told because they didn't have a chance to allow the dough to rise, so we don't eat any leavening agent. So the question is, what is chametz and what is matzah? So chametz is not peas, it's not beans, it's not corn, it's not rice. Those kinds of things cannot become chametz. There are only 5 things that can become chametz: wheat, barley, spelt, rye, and oats. Those grains, those are the only things that can become chametz. So now the question is, well, what is matzah? What is matzah made of? Anybody want to guess what matzah is made of?
Wheat.
It's made of wheat. So then the question, or barley, spelt, rye, or oats, right? So the question is, how can something that is not allowed to be eaten because it's chametz be what we make out of in order to make matzah? And the answer is, those grains are not automatically chametz. They don't become chametz until they have come in contact with water. When water has come in contact with any of those grains, a process begins called fermentation. And what's interesting is that the fermentation doesn't really kick in until 18 minutes after the water has come in contact with the grain. That is what becomes chametz or chametz. The way to arrest and stop the process of fermentation is by baking. When you bake, you stop the fermentation, and now it has become matzah. So if you look at the formula, you will see that this is how it works. Hametz is wheat, barley, spelt, rye, or oats, plus water, plus at least 18 minutes. Then it has begun the fermentation process. Matzah is any of these grains plus water, but baked within 18 minutes. So the key is that in order for it to become matzah, it must have been baked within 18 minutes. So I want to show you now what that must be like in order to make matzah. So this is a short piece from CBS Sunday Morning, and this will give you an insight into how matzah is made today. Let me share this with you and enjoy.
Thinking about going solar, but not sure whether it's worth it for your home? Well,
Okay.
At Strites, there's a team of rabbis on hand to see that it's all done according to kosher law. The whole process, from mixing to baking, must be completed in less than 18 minutes to ensure that the dough does not rise. So when does the clock begin for the 18 minutes? Like,
As soon as the water hits the flour.
all right. After the mixing, the dough is pushed down to the floor below to be rolled thin before baking. And those little holes in the matzah? Another way to ensure that dough doesn't even think about rising. Then into the ovens, 800 degrees. A couple of minutes is all it takes. What does it taste like hot? I've never had hot matzah.
Take a piece.
Ooh, oh, it's hot. It's very good.
It's amazing how flour and water can taste so good.
I know. After that, the matzah cools as it snakes its way through the floors of the old tenement buildings.
Terribly inefficient,
But it's tradition.
and this is what Grandpa left us.
Aww. And it's the way Aaron Strite's great-grandchildren like it.
We've had this pink box, I don't know, since the 40s, and everybody's like, why is it pink? I'm not sure why, but we're not going to change it.
No,
Right?
of course not. In a world where everything seems to be changing every day, it's nice to know that some things remain the same.
There's a lot of nostalgia here. We work and walk in the same halls our fathers worked in. Our grandfathers walked in these halls. Our great-grandfather walked in these halls. And there's a lot of memories here.
Flour and water, mixed with tradition and respect for the past. That's a pretty good recipe.
So that's how matzah is made. Any questions before we move our discussion along to what is the difference between keeping kosher for Passover between Ashkenazim and Sephardim? Any questions so far?
I have one, Rabbi.
Yes.
Can I, in the morning for breakfast, if I put my oatmeal in the microwave for 1 minute and 30 seconds, is that chametz or is that allowed?
So
I put some,
if it's
what do you call it? Oatmeal with, not milk, but I forget
Hot
what you
water.
call it. Yeah, well, it has to have water. It's water. I have 18 minutes. If I use, so I assume if I use it for a minute and a half or 2 minutes, and I put some fruit on it or something like that, it's got to be allowed. If I understand the criteria.
It's possible. If you have pure oats that has never come in contact with water, and you add hot water, I don't know if you can make oatmeal in a minute and a half that way, and if you're not going to get indigestion from it. But if you could, I guess, if you've consumed it within 18 minutes, it's okay. Stan.
Well, I put in almond milk and the microwave 2 minutes, and I'm a happy camper.
And 18 minutes is based on a conventional oven of that type. It's not based on a microwave. So I don't know what the translation.
Well,
the time,
I think that they have to revise the traditional standards here.
Martha.
So
Isn't it not getting the matzah wet?
Say that again, Gladys.
Isn't there some legislation about not getting the matzah wet?
Yeah. So within some of the observant communities, they are concerned that even after matzah has baked and has gone through the process that it has halted the fermentation process, they're afraid that not all of it might have been properly heated to the point that it's still not susceptible to becoming chametz. And so they're worried that, for example, if you eat matzah and you drop some crumbs and it ends up in your matzah ball soup or on the floor with a drop of water, it might turn into chametz and then you're in trouble. And so they will actually eat over a paper bag when they eat matzah and then dispose of it in order to prevent anything from accidentally becoming chametz. But but the tradition tells us, and the rabbis tell us, that once you have made it into matzah, it can become wet. You can use it. You can put matzah meal and make matzah balls out of it, because it has already gotten past the point when it can become fermented and Hametz. So in most cases, you can get it wet and you can still eat it.
Question. Is there matzah for Passover? Because we eat matzah all year round. Is that the same matzah that they make for Passover, or is it something different?
Yeah, something different, because they're going to be much more scrupulous about the matzah that they prepare for Passover, and it must say on the box for Passover use.
Oh.
So you can't, for example, use matzah from the year before, even though it may still be good, because it was made for last Passover. It's got to have been made for this coming Passover. Marla.
I'm still stuck on the goat. I wanted to know, not the goat, the lamb.
The lamb, yeah.
But I didn't know that there were sacred animals that were gods to the Egyptians. Where did that come from? Why haven't I heard about that before?
Because you didn't see Prince of Egypt. But if you saw it, you'd see that there's when they do Ra, and there's a song, and they talk about all the different gods of the Egyptians. They have the sun god, and they have the animal gods, and they've got a lot of different gods.
Okay, so that was one thing. And then the other question was, how did those grains get picked to be the ones that we could use? And why do we only use wheat?
So it's not clear, other than the fact that they are the most prevalent grains in the Middle East. And since that's where the laws begin, they use the grains that they saw perhaps are susceptible to fermentation. So rice, for example, does not ferment when you add it to water. It rots, and therefore it's allowed, but we'll see why it is that Ashkenazim don't eat it. But that may be why those 5 grains. And you can get matzah made, like at Trader Joe's, I think sometimes sells matzah made of something other than wheat. But wheat, I think, is the most prevalent grain and easiest to use, and that's how you end up with that. There is a problem with things like grape matzah, and they, if you within the Orthodox community, only old people are allowed to eat enriched matzah, egg matzah, grape matzah, things like that, because it is a bit problematic because it has additives. Fran.
I have a question. I buy Diet Coke, and now I see some of the Coke bottles have a yellow cap, which means kosher for Passover. How does Coke become kosher?
Well, in some cases, there are certain ingredients in soft drinks that they make sure are not included, or the way in which it's bottled and prepared. But ultimately, the fact is that some of these soft drinks are kosher all year long for Passover, and they just put a yellow label on an ordinary bottle in order to alert people that you can drink it. It's okay.
And when I was a kid, I used to say to my mother, how does milk get kosher for Passover? Are the cows kosher?
All right, so let me answer 2 questions. First, let me just double back one more step about the soft drinks. There are soft drinks that have corn syrup as an ingredient, and there are those people who will not eat corn, and therefore they will not use corn syrup.
Okay.
So sugar is going to be the main ingredient to sweeten certain soft drinks, and that's why sometimes those you'll see that is considered kosher for Passover, and the rest of the year it's not, because they use an additive like corn syrup. The second thing about the milk is we're going to see that if you buy milk before Passover, there's a concept, it sometimes has semblance of grains that might have been part of the cow's feed that made its way into the udder and into the milk. And these small, minute particles of grains will be nullified by something known as batel b'shishim, a 60th. And so that's why dairy products purchased before Passover don't have to have a kosher for Passover label, because it has had small items of chametz nullified. And if you buy it during Passover, like milk and sour cream and yogurts, you have to have it kosher for Passover.
Thank you.
Gladys.
My grandfather-in-law used to deliver wholesale soda pop to groceries, delicatessens, and restaurants. And he would go before Passover and put the little yellow labels on. And it was very generous of you to say that they were putting them on to let people know it was okay to drink it. But they also charged more.
And that's going on to this day, as you know, Gladys. You can buy kosher for Passover water in some stores, and it's a shanda as to what sometimes they're doing. Yeah, Gladys.
During COVID, you could get kosher for Passover masks in the grocery store across from Esther's house.
Yeah. I guess maybe because sometimes masks had a potato starch coating, and they had to be careful about that. But yeah, thank God we don't have to worry about that anymore. Leanne.
Yeah, that was just about the paper plates and masks and paper towels. A lot of times they're made with wheat starch.
Right.
That's what you need to be careful about.
Yeah, good. Thank you, Leanne. All right, let's move our conversation ahead a little bit. The next question, and we're going to take a few of these, so let me just put them in front of you, and then we shall discuss them. So this question, what is the difference between kosher for Passover between Ashkenazim and Sephardim, and why do Ashkenazim add these suggested foods? So the answer is that they will eat, which are peas, beans, corn, rice, millet, things like that. Whereas Sephardim have no problem eating those, they will only refrain from eating the 5 grains. So why is that the Ashkenazim add? It's in order to prevent confusion, they say. So for example, if you are in a barn in Russia and you have a sack of oats and a sack of rice, and you thought that you were eating the rice, or a gust of wind comes and somehow takes some of the grains of the oats and they fly into the sack of the rice, and therefore you weren't able to identify the grain that might be in that sack. So they say, in order to avoid confusion, we'll not eat anything that in certain ways might look like some of the forbidden grains. The Jews of Spain and Portugal, for whom rice was a staple of their diet, are not going to mittendrin add anything to what they are not going to be allowed to eat, and so they have never accepted these restrictions. What's interesting is that in Israel, because you have so many Sephardic Jews as well as Ashkenazic Jews, when you go into a kosher store, a supermarket, you might see a lot of labels that say kosher for Passover with rabbinic signatures, but the problem is they may be Sephardic rabbinic signatures, and there may be items included in the production that Ashkenazim will not eat, but you can't tell from the label. And so that's why in Israel, the Masorti rabbis, the conservative rabbis, have established that in order for this confusion not to reign for Ashkenazic conservative Jews, they have established that it now is okay to eat legumes, peas, beans, corn, rice, and so on. And that has become filtered into America. And if you want to learn more about how the conservative movement views these legumes outside of Israel, I call your attention to the documents that are being produced by the conservative rabbinate on their website, rabbinicassembly.org. I'm going to see if I can include a link to that in our chat. Let me just go here and see if I can do this really quickly. All right, so if you look, you're going to see that there's a PDF document that I'm going to add, and you can go ahead and you can download this into your computer. I'm just looking for it.
some of the kosher butchers in the valley here will label the Ashkenazic stuff, the Sephardic stuff, kitniot.
Right. Interesting that they do that. Okay, I put it in your chat. So if you want to download the Pesach guide for this year as a PDF file, you'll be able to do that now. All right, let's, how are we doing on time? So we only have 15 more minutes. So let's now talk about the ceremony of Bedikat Hametz. Let me just show you this so that you can see what is involved. So we have done all this preparation of our home for Pesach, say, and now it's going to be the night before Pesach. In this case, Pesach begins on a Tuesday night?
Monday night.
Wednesday night. So
Monday night is the first night.
Which night is the first night? Tuesday night is the first night?
No, Monday night.
Monday night.
Monday night is the first night. So Sunday nights, what you can do is you can have a final inspection, and that's what Bedikat Hametz is. It's taking a feather, you can see here, a wooden spoon, a candle, you turn all the lights off, somebody has hidden 10 breadcrumbs around the house or around the kitchen, dining room area, and then other people in the family will go and search for it. And this is supposed to be not just trying to find those 10 breadcrumbs, but the reason that you use a feather is because you really need to do a complete search and use that as a brush in order to take whatever other chametz you might find and put it all in a paper bag. So the reason that you deliberately scatter 10 breadcrumbs is because you need to find something. You're going to begin the search with the prayer that God commanded us to remove the chametz. So you better find something to remove. You find these 10 breadcrumbs using a candle, which casts a shadow, and you're going to use the feather to brush it onto the wooden spoon, and then that's going to be dumped into the paper bag. And then what happens is that the next day you're going to take that paper bag with whatever chametz you were able to find and whatever you had for breakfast, and you're going to burn it. So that is Biyur Hametz, burning the chametz, which you have to do by, say, 10 or 11 o'clock the morning of the first Seder. So in this case, it's going to be Monday morning. That's when it should be done. Mechirat Hametz. So this is important because we think that if we're able to take all of our chametz that we're not going to eat, and we're going to be very carefully putting it in the garage and covering it over with a paper towel in our freezer and refrigerator, that doesn't solve a problem. The problem is, according to the rabbis, we can't possess it, we can't own it. If we can't own chametz, it's not enough just to take it and not eat it or put it in the garage. We can't own it. So what this means is we have to sell it. And you can utilize an agent for you to help you to sell your chametz, and it's very simple. All you have to do is complete a document that says that I am going to represent you and I am going to sell all of your chametz, and I'm going to sell that to somebody who's not Jewish and bound by the laws of Passover. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to say to this person, I've got about $1,000 worth of chametz because I'm representing a whole bunch of people. By the way, in Jerusalem and in Israel, you've got the chief rabbis who are representing millions of dollars worth of chametz. And I will go to somebody who's not Jewish, and I will say, as I will be doing in a couple of weeks, I've got about $500 worth of chametz, and you're going to buy it, and you're going to own it, and that way they're just going to look after it for you. They're going to keep it in the garage, but it's going to belong to you. You want to get a U-Haul and go and pick it all up, I can give you their addresses, but you're going to own it, so they don't own it. The problem is that she doesn't want to come up with the other $499. So at the end of the holiday, she said, I don't have enough money to be able to buy the rest of it. I've changed my mind. I don't want to fulfill this contract. So what happens then is it reverts back to the original owners. That's the way we do it. That's the way in which, when you ask me to represent you, I will sell your chametz, you look after it for this person, and then you get it back again after the holiday is over. Any questions then about the way in which the selling of the chametz works and why it's important? Which, by the way, it's important because if you don't sell it, you can't eat it after the holiday. Okay. I can tell you that there's a very, very interesting story that is told about a few years ago where there was a man for whom all of the chametz was sold by a rabbi, and he now was the owner, and he understood the laws, and he understood that he really owned not only all of the bread and the cereals and everything else, but he owned everybody's liquor too. And it seems that his daughter was getting married on Sunday of Passover, and he forgot that he was responsible for buying the liquor for the Sunday afternoon wedding. And he realized that it was now Sunday morning. He needed liquor for the wedding. And he remembered that he owns all that liquor all over town in all of these homes. And he sheepishly went to all of the homes and he said, I'm so sorry, but I need that bottle of bourbon and vodka. I own it. You got to give it to me. And that's what he used for his daughter's wedding that afternoon. So it really is a legal, legitimate sale. All right, the last few things that we want to talk about is, what does our tradition tell us that we're not allowed to eat the day before Passover? So Passover is going to begin with the first Seder Monday night. What do we not eat on Monday? We usually don't eat matza because we want the taste of matza to be fresh when we have it at the Seder that night. And if you've been nibbling on it all afternoon, it's not. And we don't eat Hametz, because if we've spent all of this time ridding our house of Hametz, then we don't want to reintroduce it into our house. And so we don't eat Hametz and we don't eat matzah. It doesn't mean very much that we can't eat, but that's the tradition. Are there dishes that cannot be koshered for Passover? Yes, anything that is porous. What is unique about glassware? It's totally non-porous. So anything that's made of glass, you can use even without koshering, even though some people do rinse it, or they even put it in a container and they put water in it and they let it soak for 3 days, changing the water every 24 hours. But you don't even have to do that because glass is so non-porous. You can actually just have that for both milchik and fleshik as long as you properly clean it in between the meals. What you cannot kosher, because you can kosher your home, and that document that I just had you download, if you took advantage of that, has all of the explanation as to how to kosher your kitchen. You cannot kosher anything that's absorbent. So that includes clayware, it includes earthenware, wood. So these are the kinds of things that you can't kosher. All right, so we've got
Reed has a question.
Yeah, Teflon.
Go ahead.
Teflon.
Teflon.
Teflon, there are some substances that are problematic. Teflon actually can be koshered with boiling water, but I believe the rule is that it can't have a lot of scratches in it. So sometimes Teflon can be scratched, and so you got to make sure that it's in fairly good shape. But a lot of the stuff we can boil, we can use heat in order to make it kosher. The silverware, pots, pans, stemware, a lot of the stuff we can kosher. We don't have to go out and buy a whole new set of Passover dishes. Other questions or issues? Gladys, you're still mute. I had to mute you, Gladys, because it got a little noisy in your room, so you have to unmute.
And I go back to that midrash about why the firstborn were not killed. When you went on with your dissertation in the beginning, the Bible said, "Let us get rid of them before we all die." They had the 10 plagues. They had the 9 plagues that they warned them about, and the next day those plagues happened. And the 10th plague was the firstborn will die, and so that's when what you showed us on the board before. Let us get rid of them before we die. And that's when they got rid of that's when they allowed the Jews to leave. That's the sentence on which the Midrash was based.
Thank you. And what's interesting about that sentence, let me call it back up again here, because remember I told you that there was a discussion as to how many people died. Was it multi-generational or not? And there are those that say that because of the wording here, strike down
further down.
And it seems to be in the singular, not the plural, and that's why some people say it was only the oldest generation that lost their firstborn. So it's still open for interpretation. Any other thoughts or questions? Okay, so next Thursday night, we're going to be taking a deep dive into the Haggadah. There's a lot of fascinating stuff going on in that Haggadah, and I invite you to come. We're going to be including some readings that you might use that are relevant to the crisis in the Middle East now. That might be helpful to be additions to your Seder. So I'm going to share some of those with you as well next Thursday. And we're going to not go through every page. It's still going to be just an hour session, but I'm going to show you some of the really fascinating potential discussion material that can be used, whether or not you're leading a Seder yourself or just going to somebody's Seder. I have taken the opportunity to record this presentation that I made for you tonight. So if there's anybody that you feel could be helped by this primer on how to prepare for Passover and what Passover is all about, you will be able to find this on the Shirami YouTube site, where I'm going to label it tomorrow, so it will say Passover, it'll say Passover preparation, but this evening is being live streamed and it will appear on YouTube. I thank you all for tuning in tonight. I wish all of you a Shabbat Shalom. I hope to see you next Tuesday night for the Haggadah.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you.